ॐ अज्ञानातिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपा कथा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरु श्रीयुतपदकमलान् श्रीगुरुवैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातां सहगण रघुनाथान्वितां तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्ण चैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगणललित श्रीविशाख अन्वितांश्च नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वतीदेवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे वंशाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। नमो महावदान्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्यनाम्ने गौरत्विषे नमः। हे कृष्णकरुणा सिन्धो दीनबान्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकान्त राधाकान्त नमोऽस्तुते तप्तकाञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी ऋषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. We are reading from Śrīla Prabhupāda-līlāmṛta, Volume 1, Chapter 10. This momentous hour of need. Our capacity of presenting the matter in adequate language, especially a foreign language, will certainly fail, and there may be so many literary discrepancies in spite of our honest attempt to present it in the proper way. But we are sure that with our all faults in this connection, the seriousness of the subject matter will be taken into consideration, and the leaders of the society will still accept this on account of its being an honest attempt for glorifying the Almighty Great, so much now badly needed. From Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Volume 1. Bhaktivedanta Swami, accompanied by some of the Keshavaji's Mutt devotees, made a short preaching tour of Agra, Kanpur, Jhansi, and Delhi. But he was soon back in his own place at Vamshi Gopalji temple. No one called him Abhay Babu any longer. Even amongst friends, it was Swamiji or Maharaj, and people often addressed him as Swami Bhaktivedanta Ji, Swami Maharaj, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. People readily recognized him as a sadhu and offered respect. Yet his basic problems remained. He wanted to write and print, but he had no money. He wanted to broadcast the message of God, but few were willing to listen. Such things hadn't been changed by his becoming a Swami. When a librarian advised Bhaktivedanta Swami to write books, they were permanent, whereas newspapers were read once and thrown away. He took it that his spiritual master was speaking through this person. Then an Indian army officer who liked Back to Godhead suggested the same thing. Bhaktivedanta Swami took it as a revelation from his spiritual master. As a dependent servant, constantly meditating on the desires of his transcendental master and seeking his guidance, Bhaktivedanta Swami felt his spiritual master's reciprocal blessing and personal presence. More and more he was feeling confidential contact with Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, and now he was feeling an inspiration to write books. He considered Srimad Bhagavatam because it was the most important and authoritative Vaishnava scripture. Although Bhagavad Gita was the essence of all Vedic knowledge presented in a brief ABC fashion, Srimad Bhagavatam was elaborate. And Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati and Bhakti Vinod Thakur had both written Bengali commentaries on Bhagavatam. In fact, most of the great Vaishnava acharyas of past had commented on Srimad Bhagavatam. Lord Chaitanya himself had recommended Srimad Bhagavatam as the spotless Vedic literature. An English translation and commentary for this book could one day change the hearts of entire world. And if he could publish even a few books, his preaching would be enhanced. He could go abroad with confidence and not appear empty-handed. One day, Gaur Chandra Goswami proprietor of Radha Damodar temple, approached Bhaktivedanta Swami, inviting him to come live at Radha Damodar temple. Being the eternal home of Jiva Goswami and Rupa Goswami, it would be more suitable for his writing and translating. Bhaktivedanta Swami was interested. He had never stopped his regular visits there, and he always felt inspired in the presence of Samadhi tombs of the great leaders of Lord Chaitanya's movement, Jiva Goswami and Rupa Goswami. But when he went to look at the two available rooms, he found them in poor repair. They had not been maintained or lived in for many years. Not wanting to miss the opportunity, however, Bhaktivedanta Swami agreed to take the rooms at 5 rupees per month. He estimated that for a little more than 500 rupees he could have electricity installed and extensive repairs made, and when it was finished he could move in. Bhaktivedanta Swami saw the invitation as auspicious, and living there would complement his new project of presenting Srimad Bhagavatam in English. Of all Vrindavan's temples, Radha Damodar had the largest collection of original writings by the six Goswamis and their followers, more than 2,000 separate manuscripts, many of them 300, some even 400 years old. Bhaktivedanta Swami looked forward to residing there some day and serving in the company of Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Jiva Goswami. For now, he would remain at the Vamsi Gopalji temple, and with whatever money he could collect, he would gradually repair the rooms. It was an important maxim of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati that a preacher should go to cities and not remain in the seclusion of a holy place. So, in that spirit, Bhakti Vedanta Swami continued commuting to Delhi, even though to him it was a hell and even though he had no fixed residence there. Often he was taken in by businessmen who felt obliged on the basis of Indian culture. A good man, if he wanted to be favored by God, should accommodate the sadhus and give them meals and a place to stay. But the vision of such pious men was a sentimental Hinduism, and their receptions were artificial. They could not really appreciate Bhaktivedanta Swami's work, and Bhaktivedanta Swami was not of a mind to impose himself upon such hosts. Then he spoke with Mr. Hitsaran Sharma, manager of Radha Press. In the past, Mr. Sharma had printed flyers and stationery for the League of Devotees, and Bhaktivedanta Swami had stayed in Mr. Sharma's house on occasion. Mr. Sharma introduced Bhaktivedanta Swami to Pandit Sri Krishna Sharma, a caste Brahmin and active religionist, secretary to the century-old Delhi Religious Society, Sri Naval Prema Sabha. Out of sympathy for Bhaktivedanta Swami's literary labors, Krishna Pandit gave him a room in his Radha Krishna temple in Chippewada neighborhood of Old Delhi. Now Bhaktivedanta Swami would have a permanent office in Delhi. The train from Madura would arrive at the Old Delhi station near Chandni Chowk, the broad avenue down which poured sorry, Krishna, which poured a river of workday traffic. Rickshaws, bicycle riders, sometimes a dozen abreast, autos in lesser numbers, men running on foot pulling heavy carts and beasts of burden, donkeys, oxen, and occasional camel or elephant carrying heavy loads and being driven by men with the whips in their hands. From the intensely busy Chandni Chowk, Bhaktivedanta Swami would take the short walk to Chippewada past the Red Fort, keeping the Gaur Shankara temple on his left, then proceeding along a side street past the large, imposing Jama mosque. Near Chippewada, the streets would become narrow. Chippewada had been a Muslim neighborhood until the India-Pakistan partition of 1947, when thousands of Punjabi Hindus had settled there. Chippewada was part of a mixed Hindu-Muslim neighborhood, so crowded with people that cars were not allowed to enter the streets. Only ox carts and rickshaws could penetrate the narrow, crowded lanes, and in some areas the lanes were planted with iron posts to keep rickshaws out. Even a bicycle rider would create havoc amongst the densely packed crowds of shoppers and workers who moved along the streets and lanes. Side streets led to other side streets, lanes so narrow that the second floor balconies on opposite sides of the streets were only inch apart, practically forming a roof over the street so that a pedestrian could glimpse only the narrowest patch of sky. Primary yards, shops, and alleys became almost indistinguishable from the public through thoroughfares. Although most shops bore signs in Hindi with subheadings in English, some bore the curvy scripts of Arabic, and women dressed in black with wild faces were a common sight. In the heart of this intense city life was the narrow entrance of Krishna Pandit's Radha Krishna temple with a plague of devout demigod, uh, plague of demigod Ganesha and a row of nesting pigeons just above its simple arched door. The temple, with its resident families, retained some of the tenement's atmosphere of neighborhood. Although the temple room was dark, the Radha Krishna deities on altar were well illuminated. Radharani was the color of cream, and Krishna was black marble and stood about 2 feet tall. He was decorated with dots of fresh sandalwood pulp and a mask of yellow sandalwood on his forehead. Both deities were dressed in silk garments. On the second floor, just above the deity room, was a guest room, Bhaktivedanta Swami's room. Its cement walls and floors were completely bare. Protruding up from the floor was a 3 foot high concrete pyramid with a spear, indicating that the deities were directly beneath. Bhaktivedanta Swami soon found that his room was not secluded but was side by side with other residential rooms. Outside the door, a metal grating smaller than in Vamshi Gopalji temple and Keshavaji Mutt revealed the small temple courtyard below. From the roof, hardly a single tree could be seen. The view was of tenement rooftops so tightly crowded together that it seemed one could walk from roof to roof all the way to the Colosseum Jama Masjid. The mosque's three large domes, surrounded by taller minarets, rose high above the ordinary buildings, attracting flocks of pigeons which perched upon the domes or flew in the wheeling patterns in the sky. Krishna Pandit, dressed in a black, light-weighted cotton coat, the kind made internationally recognizable by Pandit Nehru, and he had the Nehru hat also. He spoke good English and was garrulous. He was well known and respected within the neighborhood. He saw Bhaktivedanta Swami as God sent, a sadhu for him to take care of, and thus prove once again the piety of Hindu culture. He found his new guest likable, a simple, gentle, gracious, and accomplished Vaishnava scholar. Krishna Pandit said he understood the importance of Bhaktivedanta Swami's Sanatan Dharma mission and his need for a Delhi office, and he vowed to supply his guest with whatever he required. Although Bhaktivedanta Swami was reluctant to ask for anything for himself, Krishna Pandit brought in a sitting mat and a low table, placing them before the pyramid, and he also brought a mattress. He showed Bhaktivedanta Swami how to operate the room's single light, a bulb and metal shade that hung from a cord and could be raised or lowered by hand. He brought a picture of Radha and Krishna that had been given to him to his guru by the Maharaj of Jaipur and set it within a niche in the wall, relishing that Bhaktivedanta Swami could gaze upon it with the eyes of a true devotee. Bhaktivedanta Swami had wanted a secure place for writing books before going to the West, and Lord Krishna had provided it. Now he could work either in Vrindavan or in Delhi. Almost immediately he began back to Godhead again, serializing book excerpts from his previous manuscripts, while at the same time beginning Srimad Bhagavatam. When Krishna Pandit learned of his guest's lone struggles to produce Back to Godhead, he volunteered to help with some of the business aspects of the publication. Bhaktivedanta Swami was indeed gratified by Krishna Pandit's sincere help, and in appreciation he gave him an addition to his name, Hari Bhaktanudasa, one who serves the Lord's devotee. After 6 months in Chippivada, Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote an appreciation in the temple's guest book. I am pleased to write herein that I have come to Delhi from my headquarter 1859 Keshi Ghat, Vrindavan, UP, purely on spiritual mission to propagate the cult of devotional service of the Lord. And I am more pleased to mention herewith that Sriman Sri Krishna Sharma Hari Bhaktanudas has provided me a suitable room for my literary activities. I am publishing an English fortnightly magazine of the name Back to Godhead from this place and the novel Prem Sabha of which Sri Krishnaji is the Oni. honorary secretary, is arranging for my daily lectures on Srimad Bhagavat. Late Pandit Jyoti Prasad Sharma, father of Sri Krishna ji, was also known to me, and during his lifetime, whenever I used to come to Delhi, late Pandit Jyoti Prasad ji would provide me with residential place. His good son is also following in the footsteps of his noble father, and as a secretary of Naval Prem Sabha, he is doing good service in propagating Rama Nama all over the city. In neat English script, Bhaktivedanta Swami went on to write that, in his opinion, temples should be used solely for educating the public in spiritual values and that it was his personal mission to organize temples for that service. Temples are not meant for ordinary householders engaged simply in matters of animal propensities. Those who are actually engaged in the service of Lord Deity, the predominator of the temple, can only be allowed to remain in the temple, otherwise not. Trying to compose Srimad Bhagavatam at Chippivada while surrounded by sometimes noisy families with their non devotional domestic habits had impressed upon him the importance of not using a temple as an apartment house. Despite his plans to settle down and begin the monumental task of translating Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhaktivedanta Swami was ready to preach in other ways also. In October of 1959, he had encountered a news article in the Times of India. Two American scientists had received the Nobel Prize in Physics for discovering the antiproton. According to one of the fundamental assumptions of the new theory, the article read, there may exist another world or an anti-world built up of antimatter. The other world reminded Bhaktivedanta Swami of eternal spiritual world described in Bhagavad Gita. He was well aware that the scientists were not speaking of anti-material in the sense of eternal or spiritual, but he thought of using their scientific terms to capture the interest of scientific minded people. He conceived of an essay presenting the theistic science of Bhagavad Gita in terms of the anti material particle and anti material world. It was a time when the whole world was talking of space travel. Indian news media had reported the Russian Sputnik 2 years ago, and the race for space had begun. Seizing on the current interest in space travel, Bhaktivedanta Swami described how by Bhakti Yoga the soul can travel past the farthest reaches of space to the eternal planets of spiritual world where life is blissful and full of knowledge. He gave his own fresh translations of Bhagavad Gita verses couched in the language of the new physics with its antimaterial particle and antimaterial world. The complete work, Essay Journey to Other Planets, was a 15,000 word manuscript and he showed it to Hitsaran Sharma of Radha Press, but he didn't have enough money to get the little book printed. In February of 1960, Bhaktivedanta Swami decided to print it himself in two installments of Back to Godhead. The articles drew an immediate response from an physicist at Gujarat University in Ahmedabad, Mr. Y.G. Nayak, who received Back to Godhead through the mail. Dr. Nayak thought Bhaktivedanta Swami's application of anti-material principle was really a grand one. This is no doubt a classic essay. Dr. Nayak was interested in further discussion on physics and transcendental knowledge, and Bhaktivedanta Swami replied with equal enthusiasm, finally asking the physicist to join him in distributing the cultural heritage of India to the whole world. Convinced that such an essay had great potential to interest educated English speaking readers, Bhaktivedanta Swami worked hard to raise enough in donations to print Easy Journey to Other Planets as a paperback book. He finally did so in the fall of 1960. A foreword by Dr. N. K. Siddhant, Vice Chancellor of the University of Delhi, arrived late but was included in the book as an insert. While everyone may gain from it, the student community in particular is recommended to read the book with care and practice Bhakti Yoga, which will help to strengthen the mind and build up character. I shall be glad to see this work read by the students and the teachers alike. Several Indian scientists and scholars contributed reviews, noting the book's scientific cum spiritual vision and the method of speeding over space not by mechanical acceleration of speed but through psychological effort and spiritual emancipation. It was only 38 pages, but it was his first publication aside from the one page folded newspaper Back to Godhead. He tried to distribute the little book effectively. He gave one copy to Dr. P. Banerjee of National Museum of New Delhi. Dr. Banerjee. He used to come to library and consult some books, and I met him there. He gave me a book called Easy Journey to Other Planets. He gave me some copies to distribute for a rupee or half a rupee each. I felt attracted to him. I thought he was a saintly person with pure devotion and without any outward glamour. He was not out to attract people just for name and fame. He had little support from anybody. He was living alone in a small room in Chippiwada. He was devoted to his studies. So I asked him, Sir, if you have time and if you don't mind coming to my house, could you kindly come on Sundays and recite the Bhagavad Gita in my house? I readily agreed. He was a good scholar. He was learned in scriptures and he was fond of communicating his ideas to others. He was a good speaker and a good conversationalist. He was very polite. Whatever he said very distinctly. He spoke in Bengali and explained the essence of the verses. Sometimes he also referred to the commentaries just to give me more information. The others were not very much interested in commentary or in different difficult aspects, but because he knew that I had some studies in the field, he explained the commentaries for my sake and for the sake of one or two other gentlemen who were also very elderly and very scholarly. The gatherings at my home would be attended by about 20 or 30 people, and he would continue his explanation for 1 or 2 hours. Then he would recite the Hare Krishna mantra, and he would also take part in the kartals and harmonium. So it was a very enjoyable gathering because he made the difficult things very easy and he explained everything to all of us according to our needs. He knew that this much is for this person, this much is intended for this man, this much for the others. After the meetings, he used to take a little rest in my house. I requested him to take meals in my house, but he said he did not take meals prepared by others. But when he met my wife and she said she would be happy to prepare the meals, he said, All right, I will take. And she used to prepare meals on Sundays when he would come. He sometimes asked me how to get more and more people attracted towards this field. But as a government worker, I could not persuade anyone very openly. Nor had I the time to organize anything on a big scale for him. But he was not satisfied with that. He asked me if I could organize on a bigger scale. He knew that the people who attended the meetings at my house were very old, 70, 80. One was 90 years of age, retired educated persons. It lasted for no less than a year. After that, he said he would be trying to go out to other places. He asked me to continue the gatherings, but I said I am not initiated. He said I could continue anyway because I was born as a Brahmana. He gave me the authority to continue for some time, but I could not continue because I used to go out. I lost all the interest after he left. I was a government servant. Easy Journey to Other Planets had been like a warm up for his real work of presenting Srimad Bhagavatam. But now he was even more convinced of the need for the books. To preach, he would have to have books, especially if he were to go to the West. With books, he could create a spiritual revolution. There was so much literature in the West, but Westerners had nothing like this, nothing to fill their spiritual vacuum. Although he wanted to give as much time as possible to Srimad Bhagavatam. He decided to continue with Back to Godhead by using excerpts from already existing books, manuscripts as articles. Occasionally, however, he would write and print a new article. In the relevant inquiries, he wrote, we are just trying to make an humble attempt to save the human being by propaganda of back to Godhead. This propaganda is not fictitious. If there is any reality at all, this propaganda of back to Godhead is the beginning of that era of reality. In a godless civilization, Bhaktivedanta Swami referred to Prime Minister Nehru's complaints about misuse of public funds in the name of religion. Bhaktivedanta Swami noted that although there were undoubtedly instances in which religious leaders were implicated in criminal offences, if statistics were compared, the religious cheaters would be outnumbered by political cheaters. Although Pandit Nehru had been right in warning of religious fraud, the warning could not be effective without a thorough reform of spiritual institutions, and that reform could be accomplished only by the cooperation of government leaders. Bhaktivedanta Swami quoted from his letter in which he had asked Prime Minister Nehru to take up the study of Bhagavad Gita, but he informed his back to Godhead readers Pandit Nehru had never replied. Because of his lack of spiritual knowledge, he thought that this institution, the League of Devotees, might be something like the so many mathas and temples which have become the source of headache for the Pandit. Bhaktivedanta Swami charged that Pandit Nehru thought that any spiritual organization is a dungeon for accumulating public funds and then misuse it for questionable purposes. He, however, approves of the so called sadhus who do social service and talk nonsense in spiritual science. This is so because he had no depth of spiritual knowledge for himself, although he is Brahman and Pandit. Ignorance in spiritual knowledge is the qualification of the Shudras or the laboring class. He requested Pandit Nehru not to be afraid of the word God or Krishna, but we can assure him that there is no such cause of fear because Krishna is everyone's friend and able to render real help to everyone. Bhaktivedanta Swami ended by suggesting that immoral practices were not confined only to the temples of India but were common to materialistic civilizations all over the world. In particular, he cited the disturbances amongst youth that were becoming rampant in the 1960s. The best thing will be for the physicians to heal himself first, because in godless civilization, while the occupant of mathas and temple have been the cause of headache for the pandit, the same thing under a different label has become the cause of headache for other European and Asian statesmen. The unbridled youngsters of those countries, under the name of teddy boys in England and rebels without cause in America, and the half strong in Germany, the leather jackets in Sweden, the children of the sun in Japan, and the style boys in USSR are some of the byproducts of a godless civilization. And that is the root cause of all headache that requires a thorough treatment. At Chippiwada, Bhaktivedanta Swami followed much the same daily schedule as at Keshi Ghat, except that with Krishna Pandit doing some of the secretarial work for Back to Godhead, he was free to devote more hours to Srimad Bhagavatam. Krishna Pandit. He used to translate Srimad Bhagavatam before dawn, about 3 a.m. In the beginning, there was no typewriter, but then he arranged a portable typewriter. He would do his daily work and then cook his food himself. I arranged raw material for his cooking. Sometimes he used to cook for to my family, asking my wife to get some food. Sometimes he would also bath at 5 or 6 in the afternoon. Every day he was typing, and he himself was reading some Bhagavatam. And he was going down in the temple for darshan. Then he was going outside, sometimes returning at 2 or 4 in the afternoon. Then he was typing and sending the proofs of back to Godhead to a place and checking them. He was doing by hand all this type of work. His main activity was typing many hours a day. Bhaktivedanta Swami worked from a Sanskrit and Bengali Bhagavatam, edited by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and a large book containing the original commentaries of 12 great acharyas. He had a standard format. He made a Roman transliteration of Sanskrit Devanagari script, then word for word English synonyms and English prose translation, and finally his English purport on that verse. Before writing his own purport, however, he would consult the commentaries of acharyas, especially Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, Vishwanath Chakravarti, Jiva Goswami, Vijayadvaja Tirtha, and Sridhar Swami. He contemplated the size of the project he was attempting. The Bhagavatam contained 18,000 verses. The first canto's 17 chapters would fill 3 volumes of 400 pages each, and the second canto with 10 chapters would take 2 volumes. Up through the ninth canto, there would be many 30 volumes, maybe 30 volumes. The 10th canto, containing 90 chapters, would take 20 volumes. There were 12 cantos, and so the total would be at least 60 volumes. He thought he might be able to finish it in 5 to 7 years. If the Lord keeps me physically fit, then in the fulfillment of Srila Prabhupada's will, I could complete this work. He decided to introduce the first volume with biographical sketch of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the ideal preacher of the Bhagavatam. The reader could best appreciate the Bhagavatam by seeing its practical demonstration in the life of Lord Chaitanya. The special feature of Lord Chaitanya's presentation had been his desire that Srimad Bhagavatam be preached in every nook and corner of the world by everyone who happens to take his birth in India. Lord Chaitanya had called Srimad Bhagavatam the spotless Puran and had considered the chanting and hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam along with the Hare Krishna Mahamantra to be a complete scientific process for developing pure love of God. Working from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati commentaries on Chaitanya Charitamrita and Chaitanya Bhagavat, Bhaktivedanta Swami gave a 50-page synopsis of Lord Chaitanya's life and his Sankirtan movement. He described Lord Chaitanya's divine ecstasies, his philosophical confrontations with leading scholars of the day, and his inauguration of Sankirtana movement, the congregational chanting of the holy name. Bhaktivedanta Swami especially connected Lord Chaitanya's life and teachings to what he saw as the present crucial time in history. Help for humanity in this momentous hour of need. I lay in the Vedic literature and especially in Srimad Bhagavatam. We know that the foreign invaders of India could break down some of the monumental architectural work in India, but they were unable to break up the perfect ideals of human civilization so far kept hidden within the Sanskrit language of the Vedic wisdom. The Sanskrit language had protected the secrets for thousands of centuries, but now the secret had to be released to the world. As he approached the first verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhaktivedanta Swami became absorbed in Bhagavatam's purpose. The verses stress that the Bhagavatam alone could save society from the evil influences of age of Kali. Srimad Bhagavatam recommended for this age was simply to hear from the pure devotees about the supreme personality of Godhead Krishna. The setting of Bhagavatam was a gathering of sages at Naimisharanya about 5,000 years ago at the dawn of the present age of Kali. Foreseeing the degradation of humanity, the sages asked the senior members of the assembly, Suta Goswami, now that Lord Krishna, the shelter of all religious principles, has returned to his spiritual abode, where are the religious principles to be found? Suta's answer was that the epic Srimad Bhagavatam, which is as brilliant as the sun, was an literary incarnation of God and would give direction to persons lost in the dense darkness of Kali Yuga. In the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva, under the instruction of his spiritual master Narada Muni, sat down and entered a deep meditation. In trance, he saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his energies, and the suffering souls of Kali Yuga. He also saw that the remedy for their suffering was pure devotional service. With this vision and the instructions of his spiritual master was his inspiration, as his inspiration, Vyasadeva set about to compile Srimad Bhagavatam to give the highest benefit to the suffering souls of Kali Yuga. In presenting the literary incarnation of God, Srimad Bhagavatam, for the benefit of Western world, Bhaktivedanta Swami realized that he was performing an important task, following in the footsteps of Srila Vyasadeva. As Srila Vyasadeva had had a vision of Krishna and had received direction for his spiritual master before beginning his literary mission, Bhakti Vedanta Swami had his vision and had received instructions from his spiritual master. Bhaktivedanta Swami envisioned distributing in mass the book of Srila Vyasadeva. He would not merely translate it, he would personally take it to the West, present it, and teach people in the West through the book and in person how to develop pure love of God. Srila Prabhupada. The Communist Party has become popular simply by distributing their literature. In Calcutta, the communist agents were inviting friends and reading their literature. The Russians never came to India, but by distributing literature in every language, they got a pretty good number of followers. If it is possible for ordinary third class mundane literature, why shouldn't transcendental literature create devotees all over the world? There is a good potency for pushing on these literatures very vigorously from village to village. The Bhagavad Dharma is the original religion of human society. Whatever else may be passing as religion has come from the Vedic literature. People are after these books. They are hankering for them. Lord Chaitanya said that in every town and village on the surface of the world, they will know the message of the Sankirtan movement. This means that in every village and town all over the world, there are many candidates who are awaiting this message. It is transcendental literature. Nobody can challenge it. It is done so nicely without any spot, the spotless Puran. Bhaktivedanta Swami put his faith in Srimad Bhagavatam, giving up almost all other kinds of missionary activity. And this had been the advice and example of his spiritual master and of Lord Chaitanya. They had not been interested in building costly temples or in creating many neophyte disciples. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had stressed preaching. Preaching meant books, and the best book was Srimad Bhagavatam. To write and publish the Bhagavatam for the enlightenment of general populace was a real service to the Lord. That was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's opinion. He had preferred publishing books to establishing temples, and he had specifically told his disciples to write books. It was the business of advanced, empowered devotees to write books, publish them, and distribute them widely. A program to distribute transcendental literature everywhere, with even more expertise than the communists, would create a great positive effect on the people of Europe and America. And if Europeans and Americans turned to Krishna consciousness, then the rest of the world would follow. Bhaktivedanta Swami continued working alone in his room at Chippivada, absorbed in thoughts of spreading the news of Krishna on a scale never before attempted. He sometimes wondered how Westerners who were so far removed from the Vedic culture could adopt it. They were meat eaters, mlechas. When one of his godbrothers had gone to England, the Marquis of Zetland, on hearing the four prohibitions against sinful life, had laughed scornfully. Impossible. But Srimad Bhagavatam spoke for itself. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is also the Paramatma in everyone's heart and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, does cleanse the desire for material enjoyment in the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge for hearing his Krishna's message, which are themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. Although he was known as an English preacher, Bhaktivedanta Swami knew there were always faults in his presentation in that foreign language, and there was no editor to correct them. But such technical faults would not keep him from printing Srimad Bhagavatam. This idea was also presented in the opening chapters of Srimad Bhagavatam. The literature, which is full with descriptions of transcendental glories of the names, fame, form, pastimes, etc., of the unlimited Supreme Lord, is a different creation of transcendental vocabulary, all meant for bringing about a revolution in impious life of misdirected civilization of the world. Such transcendental literatures, even though irregularly composed, is heard, sung, and accepted by the purified men who are thoroughly honest. Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote in his purport, "We know that in our honest attempt for presenting this great literature conveying transcendental message for reviving the God consciousness of the people in general, as a matter of re-spiritualization of the world atmosphere is fraught with many difficulties. Our capacity of presenting the matter in adequate language, especially a foreign language, will certainly fail, and there may be so many literary discrepancies in spite of our honest attempt to present it in the proper way. But we are sure that with our all faults, in this connection, the seriousness of the subject matter will be taken into consideration, and the leaders of the society will still accept this on account of its being an honest attempt for glorifying the Almighty Great, so much now badly needed. When there is fire in the house, the inmates of the house go out for help from the neighbors, who may be foreigners to such inmates, and yet without any adequate language, the victims of the fire express themselves and neighbors understand the need, even though not expressed in adequate language. The same spirit of cooperation is needed in the matter of broadcasting this transcendental message of the Srimad Bhagavatam throughout the whole polluted atmosphere of present day world situation. After all, it is a technical science of spiritual values, and as such, we are concerned with the techniques and not with the language. If the techniques of this great literature are understood by the people of the world, there is the success. Certainly, Kali Yuga was such an emergency. The house was on fire. Honest men who could understand the need would welcome Srimad Bhagavatam, even though it was now being presented with so many faulty and broken linguistic technicalities. Bhaktivedanta Swami was presenting Srimad Bhagavatam unchanged with the greatest respect for Srila Vyasadeva. And that was his cardinal virtue. He was adding his own realizations, but not in a spirit of trying to surpass the previous spiritual masters. In the all important matter of presenting the subject strictly in parampara, Bhaktivedanta suffered from no faulty and broken technicalities. He knew that without the parampara, the Bhagavatam purports would have no value. Day and night he typed at his desk beneath the small adjustable light that dangled from the ceiling on its cord. He sat on a thin mat, his back to a large pyramid that stood oddly upright within the bare room. Pages accumulated, and he kept them in a place with stones. Food and sleep, although necessary, were only incidental. He was completely convinced that his Srimad Bhagavatam would create a revolution in a misdirected civilization. Thus, he translated each word and gave each purport with exacting care and concentration. But it had to be done as quickly as possible. In February of 1961, on Vyasa Puja Day, the anniversary of the appearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Bhaktivedanta Swami was again in Vrindavan. In honor of their spiritual masters, some of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples had gathered, offered flowers before his picture, and held congregational chanting in the temple. But Bhaktivedanta Swami thought that they should do they should be doing much more than that. They should be planning and executing the worldwide preaching mission that Bhakti Siddhanta's Saraswati had desired. Instead, they were a gathering of independent individuals, each with his own small idea, each maintaining a small center or living at a center, but with no world programs, not even a program for India. Most of them had no plans or visions beyond their own bodily maintenance. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had asked for a governing body to conduct his movement, but there was no governing body and practically there was no movement. Some who had fought bitterly were again on speaking terms and feared that any sudden organizational attempt now might simply stir up old animosities. At least they could gather together and make an offering to their spiritual master. Amongst his god brothers, Bhaktivedanta Swami was a junior sannyasi. Although a recognized writer and editor, he had no temple or followers. Yet he knew he was trying to follow Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He saw himself helpless and alone against the vast forces of Maya. His god brothers were not an army united against Maya's force, but were more like apathetic monks, growing old, holding on to religious principles and rituals devoid of life. How could they gather to worship their spiritual masters without distressfully admitting their failure and in the spirit of better later than never, trying to rectify it? Since the custom on Vyasa Puja day was for each disciple to write an offering glorifying his spiritual master and to share it within the assembly of God brothers, Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote an offering more like an explosion than eulogy and humbly placed it before his God brothers for their response. Even now, my God brothers, you return here on the order of our spiritual master, and together we engage in this puja. but simply a festival of flowers and fruits doesn't constitute worship. The one who serves the message of Guru really worships him. Oh shame, my dear brothers, aren't you embarrassed? In the manner of businessmen, you increase your disciples. Our master said to preach, let the neophyte remain inside the temple and simply ring the bells. But just take a good look at the terrible situation that has arisen. Everyone has become a sense enjoyer and had given up preaching. From the seas across the earth penetrate the universal shell, come together and preach this Krishna consciousness. Then our master's service will be in proper order. Make your promise together today. Give up all your politics and diplomacy. If the disciples of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati could join and preach together, there was every chance that they could create a spiritual revolution within the sinful world. That had been the hope of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, and Bhaktivedanta Swami expressed that hope in his Vyasa Puja offering. When will that day come when a temple will be established in every house, in every corner of the world? When will the High Court judge be a Gaudiya Vaishnava with tilak beautifully decorating his forehead? When will a Vaishnava winning votes be elected president of the land and preaching be spread everywhere? As he read the poem, its truth exploding in the midst of gathering of aging sannyasis, some approved and some were incensed. Their meeting, however, took no new direction. They did not sit down together and plan as he had pleaded. Swami Maharaj's poem was taken as another poetic expression or as an opinion. The God brothers were inclined to let the old wounds heal with the passing of time, to go back over the whole things again and reconstruct the mission as it had been before when Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had been present, and to attempt all these ambitious programs. How was it possible? They were getting old. Some did not want to leave the shelter of Vrindavan. They would worship Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati within the holy dham. If Bhaktivedanta Swami could do something more, let him go ahead and try. Bhakti Vedanta Swami returned to Keshi Ghat, thoughtful. For many years, he had been unable to take a leading part in the mission because of family commitments. In 1935, in Bombay, his godbrothers had even asked him to be president of Mutt there, but Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had said that it was not necessary that Abhay Charan join them. He would come in his own way. Now, by the grace of his spiritual master, he was ready to fulfill the meaning of sannyas. The Krishna conscious world he had described in his poem was not a utopia presented merely to incite his godbrothers, a dreamer's talk of the impossible. It was possible. But in any case, he had to write and print Krishna conscious books and preach abroad. It was what Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati wanted. If his god brothers would not do it jointly, then he would do it. In January of 1961, one of Bhaktivedanta Swami's Delhi acquaintance had shown him an announcement for the Congress for Cultivating Human Spirit, a convention to be held in Tokyo, May 10-20. The theme was World Peace through cultivating human spirit. International participants were invited. As soon as Bhaktivedanta Swami had seen it, he had wanted to go. Although his main interest had always been the US, if Japan presented itself first, why not? And their invitation was in English. If they accepted his reservation, they would pay for his board and lodging at the convention hotel, although he would have to pay his own travels expenses. Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote to the sponsors, the International Foundation for Cultural Harmony, and proposed a speech. How should one cultivate human spirit? The Secretary General of the Foundation, Mr. Toshihiro Nakano, wrote back to him at Keshi Ghat expressing his high regard both for Indian spiritual culture and for his proposed presentation. Mr. Nakano also enclosed an official certificate as he had requested, stating that Bhaktivedanta Swami was a bona fide visitor to their convention whose expenses in Japan would be paid. They requested, um, to whom it may concern. that his passport and visa be granted in time for his May 10 arrival in Japan. Bhaktivedanta Swami then conceived a special project for the convention. The 10th canto, 20th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam presents a description of autumn in Vrindavan, and for each season phenomenon, the Bhagavatam presents a parallel teaching from the Vedas. For example, it compares the dark, cloudy evening of rainy autumn season to the present age of Kali, when the bright stars of Vedic wisdom, the saints and scriptures, are temporarily obscured by a godless civilization. The chapter contains dozens of such examples, and Bhaktivedanta Swami proposed 50 commentaries to accompany 50 illustrations to be displayed at the convention. He began preparing the commentaries, which he entitled The Light of Bhagavad. He wrote directions from which an artist could design a painting to go with each lesson from the picture. 50 pictures and commentaries, Bhaktivedanta Swami felt, would make an impressive display for visitors at the convention. The convention organizers liked the idea. As for your proposal to get pictures drawing by artists, according to your suggestion, the institution department of Congress will immediately take people disposal for it under the full consideration of about some specimen idea of picture which will be given to us by you. So I should like to get them as soon as possible. Bhaktivedanta Swami worked quickly to produce 20,000 word manuscript, 50 lessons for 50 illustrations. The pictures were to depict the forest, fields, and skies of Vrindavan during the rainy season, and the lessons were sometimes criticism of godless government, materialists, and false religionists, sometimes assertions of moral principles and God consciousness, and sometimes depictions of Lord Krishna and his eternal associates in Vrindavan. Everything went smoothly between Bhaktivedanta Swami and the sponsors in Japan. The problem was to raise the travel fare. He approached the likely sources, writing to central government's Ministry for Scientific Research and Cultural Affairs. He presented his certificate from Mr. Nakano and explained his position as a sannyasi. In late March, the ministry sent him a form to complete and return. Time was getting short. On March 29th, he wrote the Vice President, Dr. Radhakrishna, with whom he had a speaking acquaintance as well as philosophical difference. You know that I am a sannyasi without any relation with bank, neither I am attached with financing institution. But the Japanese organizers have liked my literatures and they want me to be present there. He pleaded that since the great acharyas of India had formally presented their knowledge for the benefit of the world, the Indian government today should send representatives of acharyas to deliver the message of Atma or the human spirit. He also wrote the deputy manager of India Steam Navigation Company in Bombay, reminding him of his 1958 offer to give a 50% concession on a ticket to United States. After explaining his invitation from Mr. Nakano in Japan, Bhaktivedanta Swami pointed out that the full round-trip fare to Japan would be less than half the fare to the United Nations. Trying all possibilities at once, and with less than a month and a half before the convention, he wrote to another potential donor, Mr. Bridge Ratan S. Mohata, who had once expressed his willingness to send Bhaktivedanta Swami to South America when an Indian sponsor there had written expressing interest. At that time, Bhaktivedanta Swami had been unable to get the proper certification from the Indian government. But here, he explained, was a new opportunity to present the message of the Vedic literature to an international gathering of interested people, and passage to Japan was less than to South America. On the same day, he wrote to Mr. Mohatta. He also mailed his completed form to Ministry for Scientific Research. In answer to their question as to why he was asking for donation and whether he had done so before, he replied, before this, I never asked the ministry for any financial assistance as there was no need for it. As sannyasi, I can ask for financial help when there is absolute necessity. Our life is dedicated to render service to the humanity at large for reviving the dormant spiritual consciousness. Meanwhile, His other arrangements proceeded with full cooperation from Japan. He had already sent Mr. Nakano the first 20 illustrative ideas from the light of Bhagavad. Japan is famous for artistic work, he wrote, and India is famous for spiritual culture. We should now combine, he suggested. They also print the text and picture as a book. Mr. Nakano assured Bhaktivedanta Swami that they would be eager to meet him at Haneda airport. They would be readily recognizable since they would be holding a flag. And if he liked, he could stay in Japan for an entire month and hold local meetings after the scheduled convention. Mr. Nakano also asked a favor of Bhaktivedanta Swami. To solidify relations with the mayor of three Japanese cities, he asked that Bhaktivedanta Swami send letters to the mayors requesting their full support for Human Spirit Congress. Bhaktivedanta Swami immediately complied. By now it was April and no money had come. Finally, after a personal interview in which he received a definite no from Dr. Radhakrishnan, Bhaktivedanta Swami turned to Mr. Nakano in disappointment. On April 18, he wrote, I am in due receipt of your letter of the 9th instant and I am grateful to you for all that you have said for me. I am a humble creature and I am just trying to do my bit in this connection because I was so ordered by my spiritual master Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. While I am feeling too much ecstasy for the reception arrangement you are doing for me, I beg to inform you that my passage expenses, which is near about rupees 3,500, is not yet settled. I submitted one application to Government of India for help, and the copy of my application is also sent herewith. I also wrote a private letter to Dr. S. Radhakrishnan in this connection, and the reply which I have received is also enclosed herewith. All these are not very encouraging for me. I therefore saw the Vice President today personally, but he says the same thing as he had written in his letter. Although the matter is not yet hopeless altogether, I am disturbed in my mind, thinking what shall I do in the case the government denies to help. I am therefore seeking your good advice in this connection. Dr. S. Radhakrishnan said to me that you had also invited him to attend your congress, and he opines that the passage expenses might have been paid by you. The hope and expectation of the congress is undoubtedly very great, and I wish that I may fully utilize this opportunity for general welfare of the entire human society. I have fully explained my views and authoritatively in my statements already sent to you for publication, and the gist idea is expressed in the letter of mayors, and the copy of which is also enclosed. As a sannyasi, I have no personal purse for expenditure. Under the circumstances, if the government denies to help for the passage, then I will have to ask for the same from you, otherwise, my going to Congress will end in dream only. I have very little faith in the dealings of politicians and especially of the Indian politicians. From the conversation of Mr. Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, it appeared to me that government does not approve of such congress as are organized by private persons, and as such they do not participate in such congress. I shall wait for the final decision for 1 week more, when the matter will become clear, yes or no. Replies from prospective donors in India were all negative. On April 20, he cabled Mr. Nakano. As you have developed a deep love for me, I dare to ask you to send me financial help to take me to Japan. I think you can immediately instruct your embassy in Delhi to do the needful and dispatch me to Japan on your behalf. I am feeling too much to meet you and the Congress so that we can build up a solid institute for spiritual civilization. I shall await your instruction by cable to fix up my program. But Mr. Nakano could not help, and Bhaktivedanta Swami's effort ended in a dream only. In 1962, Bhaktivedanta Swami changed his Vrindavan residence from Vamsi Gopalji temple to Radha Damodarji temple. For 3 years he had been paying the rent for of 5 rupees per month for his Radha Damodar room and paying for the expensive repairs. Now the main room had electric lighting and a fan, and the walls had been plastered and painted. The room was 7 feet by 15 feet with small smooth plaster walls and a Floor of sandstone, squares of unevenly sized and the same as the stone tiles cemented in front of Samadhi of Rupa Goswami. The room was furnished with a small low desk, a kusha mat, and a wooden cot with a rope woven surface to lie on. The view was not the panorama he had enjoyed at Keshi Ghat, and the neighborhood was not so secluded, but now, without even moving from his room, he could look into temple and see a portion of altar and a 4 feet high form of Vrindavan Chandra, the black marble Krishna deity Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami had worshipped hundreds of years ago. The main room was connected to kitchen by a 10-foot long veranda which faced the courtyard, and from his kitchen he could see the samadhi of Rupa Goswami. So the place was superior to his room at Vamshi Gopalji temple because now he was living in the temple of Jiva Goswami where great souls like Goswami Rupa, Sanatana, Raghunatha, and Jiva had all gathered, taking prasadam, chanted, and discussed Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. It was the best place to work on Srimad Bhagavatam. At 1 a.m., when no one else was up and it was very quiet, Bhaktivedanta Swami would wake and begin writing. Since electric failures were not uncommon in Vrindavan, he would often work by lantern light, but in any case, a beam of light would shine out from his room onto the veranda, while inside the room he worked under its brightness. While he wrote in stillness, sometimes a toad, or as dry as stone floor, would hop up of hiding and across the floor, exiting through the cement lattice work of the opposite wall. Sometimes a tiny mouse would run out from behind a window shutter and hide in another place. Otherwise, the room was complete sanctified stillness, and the inspiration of being in the presence of the six Goswamis was strong. Above the open courtyard, the sky would be full of clearly visible stars. As he worked, the only sounds would come from the town, perhaps of a dog barking in the distance. At 4 a.m., the temple pujari who slept under a shelter near the deity doors would awake, turn on an electric light, and with a long pole clear the bats from the rafters. At 5 a.m., after waking the deities, the pujari would open the doors before the altar and begin Mangalarti. He would offer a flame while a few resident devotees gathered and chanted. Playing instruments, usually someone would bang a gong while someone else rang a large bell. Any sound from the courtyard carried immediately to Bhaktivedanta Swami's quarters, and the clanging bell and gong would suddenly reverberate against the walls of his small room. From his sitting place, he could see only Vrindavan Chandra on the left of the altar. Sometimes he would pause at his work and walk into the courtyard to see the deities and their arti. The altar was filled with deities of Radha and Krishna, who had been worshipped by Jiva Goswami and other Vaishnava acharyas hundreds of years ago. After 10 minutes, the pujari, having offered the flame and then a conch shell filled with water, would turn and sprinkle offered water on the heads of devotees, and the ceremony would end. After working a few hours on Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhaktivedanta Swami would sit in his room and chant japa. As the morning sky turned light blue, the stars would vanish, and residents of Vrindavan would arrive to visit the deities and samadhis of the Goswamis. Old women would enter the temple calling out Jai Radhe in broken voice. When Bhaktivedanta Swami opened the shutters, his room would fill with light. His windows faced a courtyard, but they were not so much windows as cement lattice work in the wall. Although passerby could not easily see into the room, the lattice work allowed light to enter. In the morning light, the room was clearly revealed. The arched ceiling, the freshly painted walls with arched niches, the floor of inlaid stone. Bhaktivedanta Swami's thin sannyas danda, wrapped in heavy saffron khadi, leaned against one corner of the room. On one shelf, he had placed a picture of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, on another, a stack of books and manuscripts. The room's Two doors appeared flimsy even when locked, and the whole room tilted slightly to the left. It was bare but peaceful. Often sitting on the veranda between the two rooms, he would view the courtyard, the altar, and the deities Radha Damodar, Vrindavan Chandra, and several other Radha Krishna deities awaited their visitors. During the morning, the deity room remained open as a regular file of visitors turned the temple into a bustling place of pilgrimage. No one stayed very long. Some had rigid schedule to visit many temples and hurried on. Poor people and also local businessmen, their wives in colorful saris, all devotees, headed towards the altar calling Jai Ho, Jai Radhe. After greeting the deities, they would disappear through the door to the outdoor area of the temple compound to visit the samadhis. Although in Vrindavan there were hundreds of small temple-like tombs honoring past Vaishnava acharyas, Bhaktivedanta Swami regularly visited the chief samadhis, those of Sri Jiva Goswami, Sri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, and Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. Within a separate area of the temple compound were the Bhajan Kutir and the Samadhi of Rupa Goswami. Bhaktivedanta Swami often sat chanting japa before Rupa Goswami Samadhi. The line of pilgrims from the temple would continue entering the outdoor area of the compound, coming to offer dandavats to Rupa Goswami. Most pilgrims considered this the most important feature of their visit to Radha Damodar temple, and even if they offered respect nowhere else, they would stop before the Samadhi of Rupa Goswami. They would stop with folded hands and bow, chanting Jai Radhe, or with their hands in their bead bags, chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, circumambulated the Samadhi. Bhaktivedanta Swami would sit and chant even after early morning rush of visitors, or sometimes he would walk to the nearby temples of Radha Shamsundar or Radha Madan Mohan, always returning by 11 to cook his meal. As he cooked and later as he sat to take his prasadam, he could see through the lattice work the samadhi of Rupa Goswami. Feeling Rupa Goswami's presence, he would think of his own mission for his spiritual master. The devotees of Lord Chaitanya are known as Rupanugas, followers of Rupa Goswami. Without following the teachings and example of Rupa Goswami, one cannot enter the path of pure devotion to Radha and Krishna. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was especially known as strict Rupanuga, as described in the Sanskrit prayers written in his honor. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the personified energy of Sri Chaitanya's mercy, who delivers devotional service enriched with the conjugal love of Radha and Krishna, coming exactly in the line of revelation of Sri Rupa Goswami. I offer my respectful obeisance unto you. You are who are the personified teachings of Lord Chaitanya. You are the deliverer of the fallen souls. You do not tolerate any statement that is against the teachings of devotional service enunciated by Srila Rupa Goswami. Bhaktivedanta Swami's spiritual master and the previous spiritual masters in the disciplic succession had wanted the Krishna consciousness movement to spread all over the world. And as Bhaktivedanta Swami daily gathered inspiration sitting before Rupa Goswami's Samadhi, he prayed to his spiritual predecessors for guidance. The intimate direction he received from them was an absolute dictation, and no government, no publisher, nor anyone else could shake or diminish it. Rupa Goswami wanted him to go to the west. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted him to go to the west. Krishna had arranged that he be brought to Radha Damodar temple to receive their blessings. At Radha Damodar temple, he felt he had entered an eternal residence known only to pure devotees of the Lord. Yet, although they were allowing him to associate intimately with them in the place of their pastimes, they were ordering him to leave Radha Damodar and Vrindavan and to deliver the message of the Acharyas to forgetful parts of the world. In June, the weather became intolerably hot, and one could not remain active through the afternoon. During the most oppressive hours, Bhaktivedanta Swami would shut his doors and shutters and run the overhead fan. By evening, the heat would abate. Again, a flurry of visitors would arrive, and in the temple compound would be evening kirtans. Sitting on his veranda, Bhaktivedanta Swami would sometimes talk with visitors, or sometimes they would come to his door and observe him as he worked at his typewriter. He was known in Vrindavan as a scholar and a sublime devotee, but he kept to himself as much as possible, especially in the summer of 1962, working on Srimad Bhagavatam. That was his real purpose in coming here, to prepare the books he could distribute to the people of the West. Although as yet he had no means for traveling even as far as Japan and no means for printing books, these were the goals for which he worked. He had not come to Vrindavan to die and return to Godhead. Rather, he had come because it was the ideal place to gain spiritual strength for his main life's work. The exact shape of his future mission, Bhaktivedanta Swami did not know, but he did know that he must prepare himself for preaching Srimad Bhagavatam to the English speaking Western world. He must become a perfectly equipped instrument of his spiritual master, and if they desired, they would send him. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Now I hope everyone turns on the audios.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. It's very charging
Hmm.
after break. Very nice. How Prabhupada wrote Srimad Bhagavatam. 7 years or 8 years he took at the old age in the lamp, but not able to
Yeah.
read at this age. So very inspiring.
Yeah. So much passion to plan. Yeah. When we see one plan fails, then we think, from that plan, let me learn not to do that. Hmm. But here Prabhupada is taking step after step. He is talking to leaders of the nation, leaders of other nations, so many things. In what we read here was just yeah,
Yes.
somehow like poetic or prose, yeah. But in reality, going through the lanes where there is no proper hygiene, no proper sanitation, no proper lighting, yeah, and disturbances. The other day I was watching a kind of a documentary movie which was about how people will go to leave their body in Haridwar. Huh? If they leave their body there, then they'll attain moksha. So then people really go into the uh, ashrams to book their place during the last days. So if I don't know, I have not gone to Haridwar, but if someone can go, they can see how the lanes are, how narrow they are, how what kind of bare minimal facilities are there. Yeah. So yeah, in spite of such conditions, arranging himself for the service, yeah, walking all the way, yeah, great. That's why Prabhupada Nahoito it wouldn't have been possible.
Yes, Prabhuji. Very patiently Prabhupada tried for the arrangements for USA, even though Indian politicians are rejecting
Yeah,
that. Yeah, not able to understand the olden days about the spiritual. Yeah.
yeah. And anyway, yeah, thanks, Harika Mataji. Anyone else want to share anything? I have one example that I heard from Gaurang Prabhu. I'll share later.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare
Yes,
Krishna.
Prabhuji. Yeah, this is Leelamrit is really very nice. With every session, we are getting so good lessons in this. And yes, as Harika Mataji told, this chapter told the importance of Bhagavatam. And also, I like the part where Srila Prabhupada has written, although he at one point he told, I am the youngest sannyasi, but he could tell directly, and he could present whatever he felt was going wrong amongst his god brother. So yeah, that part also, Prabhuji, I liked a lot
Yeah.
in a very sophisticated manner. And yeah.
Yeah, again, in that also you see that how Prabhupada was, his interest was not to chastise how his god brothers are doing, but actually how they can, uh, it's like a kind of alarm, yeah, and wake up and then let's join hands, mm, and do something, not on a ritualistic way, not on just yeah, superficially, but actually the essence of their guru's teachings. Yeah, nice. Yeah, Gaurav Prabhu or Dharti Mataji. I thought you were saying something. No. Okay. Okay. So I'll tell you how great is Srila Prabhupada. Yeah. Of course, when we are reading every session, we are already seeing the greatness of Prabhupada. But we'll just take an example that we all know this Vada in Govardhan Eco Village. I think every one of us know. Yeah. Hmm? In that there is one Prabhu. Yeah, we know. I mean, anyway, this is a kind of outskirts of Mumbai where there is a eco village. Everything is sustained, self-sustained, maintained, built such a way. And then in that there is one devotee who is a very good expert Sanskrit scholar. And then he was given the same task. What is that? To just go through all these commentaries of various acharyas, yeah, and then write, yeah, uh, essence of it, of Bhagavatam, and what Prabhupada has finished in 7 years. Yeah, so that's what we see, that he made everything available for this Prabhu who is an expert in Sanskrit and understanding of all this. He couldn't even finish 11th verse of the first canto, first chapter, after 2 years. Yeah. And of course, Gaurang Prabhu was giving the example, not to chastise him, but he was giving the example, real example, when he was speaking about Bhagavatam. And he said, how distinguished is Srila Prabhupada? Huh? It's not so easy, just like, okay, copy paste, and no, we don't see that copy paste business. Prabhupada understands everything, understands it precisely about the point of predecessors, and brings that into his one purport. It's like churning the cream, yeah. So everything is put together, and it is so thoroughly churned that we are enjoying the cream of all the predecessor acharyas who have presented excellent commentaries of Bhagavatam. And we don't find it like a stitching pieces. We find it as essence. Yeah, it's not like a we find it as a secondary. Yeah, we feel it's still original, but still being a transmitter and instrument. I don't know if I expressed it correctly. Maybe I'll find that lecture of Gaurang Prabhu, and then you can hear. Yeah, I mean, I heard long back. So that is Srila Prabhupada. Not an easy personality to even comprehend. Yeah, whatever we may appreciate is just only still very fraction of his abilities and um, yeah, greatness.
Prabhuji, what did you say? What Prabhuji could not finish the first canto?
He in the first
Previous?
canto, I mean, of this analysis, right? After reading the bhashya of previous acharyas, right? To bring them together into one understanding, one common point. Yeah, he wanted to understand the scholarly of previous explanations and then bring them into one context. Sometimes we have this, right? When you are expert in Hindi, huh? Then you may feel like, oh, let me write something. And yeah, this Prabhu is expert in Sanskrit, and he had this desire to use that skills in serving Prabhupada. And this is the task that he took. In the library in Vada, in Govardhaneko village. He used to prepare that, yeah, and he took long time even to, yeah, do the same.
So the reading the same commentaries and writing something
Yeah,
different.
yeah, essence. Like for example, now you see this Gaurang Darshan Prabhu, right? He brings more understanding of it and then present it. Huh? He wanted to see how to put, just like if you have Bhagavad Gita and four sampradayas, everything, how those all are brought together and presented it. Hmm? So that you appreciate the similarity and you explicitly mention where is the differences. So all that is what is called analysis from different viewpoints. That is what this Prabhu was doing, trying to do.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Mhm.
Are you able
Hare
to
Krishna.
listen me?
Yeah.
Okay, Prabhuji. Probably I was on mute before. Yes, Prabhuji, it was yes, very inspiring. Yes, Prabhupada-līlā.
Mm.
This especially I felt that how much Prabhupada prepared for this Japan. He prepared this yes whole plan with the pictures
Yeah.
as well as 50 articles for these to narrate all, and
Yeah.
yes, he could convince this Japanese Mr. Nakama that yes, how he might have written all, and that I
Yeah.
feel very yes exciting that
Yeah.
yes, he could even convince someone sitting far, and still they were so much eager to see Sri Prabhupada.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing, and I don't know if someone has seen Abhay Charan. Yeah. In Abhay Charan, we don't see this Japan thing in detail. We only know that it's got rejected, yeah, or not. I mean, he couldn't succeed. Actually, I don't know. I thought that something arrangement is done, but it's late. Something like that. I thought I saw, but here we get a glimpse of still how the things went. Yeah, and
Yes,
one more
Prabhuji.
thing we can understand is that we should never feel shy to approach anyone, because if our desire is strong, we are not doing something to feel ashamed of. Yeah, we want to do everything in the service of the Lord, and for that we can get inspiration from Prabhupada. He already got rejected by Radha Krishnan before, but again he approached him if, yeah, it's needed, right? But he had strong points that he want to clearly mention. Yeah, that is one thing. The spirit in service. He always had the goal focused. Yeah, yeah. He was always, even in that Vyasa Puja offering, he was goal focused, that how to break the ice between the God brothers, so that once again he can all can work for Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. That, and again, very touching I think Varsha Mataji, when you were in Vrindavan recently, this is about Radha Damodarji temple. Yeah, very very nice. When we go inside, we see special vibration. Yeah, inside, and then the view of Samadhi Mandir, and also the view of Radha Krishna deities. I mean, it was very touching.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji, whenever the name was coming, I was in my memory, I
You're
could see the
going.
vision.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
that okay, this is okay. So yeah, it was really, really very much connecting chapter.
Yeah.
And
And also, I usually say the same thing now, that we we don't go as a tourists, as a pilgrims. It's
yes,
not that.
yes.
So all these things. Yeah, nice. So we get everything. Yeah, spiritual touch to strengthen our connection to Vrindavan. At the same time, preaching touch, so that we should understand that wherever we are, it's not like Prabhupada himself was saying that it's not that he'll stay there to die and go back to Godhead. But yeah, important is to important than that is to serve spiritual master wherever we are. Yeah,
Yes, Prabhuji. Looking forward for the next chapter.
as always. As
Yes,
always.
as always.
Yeah. Okay, I'll not take much time. It's already 7:30. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for, yeah, I think Gaurav, you want to say something, or? I don't
No,
know. Okay.
Prabhuji, it was a mistake. Yeah.
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah. So thank you very much for yeah, joining. If you are coming, then it inspires me to read. And while reading anyway, I am also relishing the Prabhupada-līlāmṛta. Thank you very much. वञ्चाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः. श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय. हरे कृष्ण. सत्स्वरूप गोस्वामी महाराज की जय.
Jai.
Jai.
कृष्ण.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
हरे
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
हरे
Hare
कृष्ण.
Krishna, Prabhuji.
हरि बोल.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
हरे कृष्ण. आदित्य माता जी, how are you doing?
Yes, Prabhuji, we are doing good, Prabhuji. And what about